We're very pleased to have with us Governor Marc Racicot. Most of you know his resume better than I, since I've only been back in Montana for about 8 years. But Marc is a person who really blends together character and policy and political prowess into one fine individual. As most of you know, he was born in Thompson Falls, grew up in the Libby area with some time in Miles City, graduated from Carroll College in Helena, and went on to law school at University of Montana, Missoula, graduating in 1973. He was in Army ROTC, and then immediately went into active service in Germany, where he was with the JAG Corps and prosecuted cases for about 3 years before returning to Montana. First as a deputy county attorney in Missoula, followed by assistant attorney general at the state of Montana in Helena. And in that position as a special prosecutor, he provided his legal prowess to counties around the state who needed some assistance in prosecuting serious felonies. And through those travels, got to know very well the people and the issues around the state. That led to him being elected as Attorney General for the state. He wanted to go on for a second term, but was able to run for governor due to the retirement of Governor Stevens in the early 1990s. Marc served 2 terms as governor, and then thereafter was, as Mindy indicated, the chair of the Republican National Committee, and then chair of the election committee for George Bush, and since 2005 has been active in private sector, practicing private law, but also serving in a multitude of volunteer and community and national organizations. So we're very pleased with the nonpartisan, bipartisan setting this afternoon. We're very pleased to have Marc here with us to give his remarks about politics in Montana and observations about the recent campaign. So, Marc Racicot. Marc, I'm going to leave this for you too, so just be sure to take it as you leave today.
Thank you, John. Well, how kind. You left out just a little bit, John, that might have been the best introduction I've ever had. So I learned some things I didn't remember or didn't know in the beginning. But one thing I do remember is that I also lost 3 political races, and the first time I ran, I got beat handily, and the second time I ran for office, I came closer, and so I thought, well, I was on the right track. So 2 years later, I ran again, and I lost again. So in the year 1988, I was 0-3, and didn't have a sparkling political resume to talk about, but I learned a lot of lessons. I learned a lot of lessons about myself, and I learned that it was not all that bad to take positions and to fail at an objective if you were doing it for the right reasons at the right time. And as a consequence of that, it worked out serving me exceptionally well over the course of time, because I realized that there were only 2 things that could happen in a political race, and one of them was bad, and that if you were ever afforded the privilege of serving, you had to remember that it is an extraordinary blessing, and that you need to make certain you do all that you can to live up to the expectations of the people that you serve. John mentioned that I was born here in Mabel McKeel's birthing house in Thompson Falls. I used to tell my kids I was born in a little log cabin on the side of a hill in Thompson Falls, Montana. It was kind of on the side of a hill, but it wasn't a log cabin. And my parents met here. They were married here. I was born here. Virtually all of our family on both sides lived in Thompson Falls, all the way from Thompson Falls to the Blue Slide Road and back. And as a consequence, I have more members of my family that either lived here or are buried here than any other place on the planet. So Thompson Falls and Sanders County, the longest county in the state, are extremely dear to me. Some might think this is an unusual gathering that we're having here today in Plains. And I would suspect that if that's all the further they went in determining what it is that we're doing here today, they would be unfortunately missing a great story about democracy in its purest form. And that's what enchanted me when Mindy called me. At first I had to ask her to repeat her invitation because I wasn't altogether certain exactly what she wanted me to do. And she said that she had come down to the University of Montana to a gathering at the Mansfield Center, heard me talking about the great middle of America, and that she thought it was appropriate that I might share a few thoughts with you today about that particular topic, that we would be joined by people from all across the political spectrum, but that partisan politics, although clearly a matter of concern and investment by all who attend, would not be reduced to the kind of partisanship that typically we end up experiencing so often in these days. It was my great delight to be able to see one of the great legislators of Montana history. Jim Elliott was a leader in the legislature from the very beginning. He had high expectations for himself as well as for those he worked with. I could trust him absolutely and completely, and I hope he could say the same. When he gave me his word and his bond, it could be counted on, I can tell you plainly. Very, very bright, a great legislator, a good friend, and I'm delighted to be able to see him today because we haven't had the chance to run into each other over these last 20 years or so. So thank you, Jim, for your good service. He plays a good hand of poker, I'll tell you, in the legislature. You never knew what he was thinking exactly. So you made certain that you tried to live up to his every expectation. So what are we talking about here today? I think that there are so many things for us to be focused upon, but one of the center core issues of our present day existence has to do with how we are formed together as a community of interest all across the United States of America. We celebrate the 50th anniversary of our Montana Constitution, the 1972 Constitution this year, the 246th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and the 234th anniversary of the ratification of the United States Constitution. It has not, however, and I think it's incredibly important in this day and age when there's so much bitter and angry political activity that's ongoing, for us to remember it's not been an easy journey to get where we are as a nation and as a state. Throughout all of human history, tracing all the way back to the theories of Aristotle and Socrates, we have had an ample opportunity, people all around the world, trying and experimenting with just about every conceivable form of government imaginable in various attempts to discover how to live together for the long run in freedom and order and tranquility. As you know, it all began with the law of the jungle in the beginning, where the strong prospered and the weak did not. That was followed thereafter over a period of 2,500 years by experimentation with monarchies, aristocracies, tyrannies, oligarchies, theocracies, colonialism, socialism, communism, and at last, ultimately, democracy. Regrettably, however, it appears undeniable, and I would bet that many of you have recognized the same thing that I have, that there are now ominous and unmistakable warning signs all around us that our constitutional government and our democratic republic are confronting serious and dangerous moments of uncertainty and peril. A recent University of Maryland Washington Post poll revealed that the percentage of Americans who believe that violent action against the government is justified stood at 34%. 1 in 3 of us, considerably higher than in past polls dating back more than 2 decades. That survey was followed closely thereafter by a National Public Radio survey revealing that 70% of Americans believe America is in crisis and at risk of failing. Benjamin Franklin predicted, and he warned of such moments upon the adjournment of the Constitutional Convention in 1787. As he exited Independence Hall, and I'm sure you all recall, he was asked, do we have a monarchy or a republic? And his response was prophetic. You have a republic if you can keep it. That remains, as it did in the beginning, the existential question of our time. Can we keep our republic? And can we keep it if the values and virtues of the rule of law, purposely interwoven by the framers in every article and every section of our Constitution, are not faithfully and consensually observed? The foundation of our democracy is our federal and state constitutions, both voluntary agreements, essentially social contracts between the people and their government. Simply by living and staying in the United States of America and in Montana, we become parties to those social contracts. A democracy is a dynamic institution. It's always changing. It's not forced upon us. We choose it. We breathe life into it and thereby become responsible for its endurance. Only with its survival from our union can we maintain liberty and our way of life. A democracy can dynamically deteriorate and rot just as quickly as it can dynamically improve. Democracy is not always easy, but it can be easily taken for granted. It requires hard work, compromise, self-discipline, and importantly, a shared respect for the thoughts and lives of all of us who occupy this one nation under God. For over 2 centuries, multiple generations of Americans and Montanans have experienced the miracle of democracy. They have witnessed and confirmed that it is only from our union that our liberty and independence spring forth. But the urgent question of the moment is, what happens to our democracy and our way of life if we cannot genuinely talk to each other or listen to each other, if we do not respect each other, if we will not sincerely and fairly consider the thoughts of each other, if we do not trust each other, and if we cannot reason with each other? The inescapable answer is plain. It is that we will not long live in freedom or independence. The adhesive that holds us together, those values and virtues infused into our constitutions and the rule of law, will disintegrate, loosing the bonds of our nation and our union, and into that abyss will stride the ghost of tyranny. And we have seen it. We have witnessed it. And we should take great, great effort to make certain we never get that close again. The most probable way for our republic to vanish is through a lack of fidelity to our constitutions and the rule of law. Not surprisingly, the Pledge of Fidelity is precisely the promise that we make to each other. implicitly or expressly, as Americans and Montanans. It's also the indispensable pledge required by our constitutional oath of office. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity, so help me God. What did the framers of our constitutions intend when they chose fidelity to be the virtue that commands the attention and conformity of every citizen and every office holder? And what is this fidelity, which we hear recited at every swearing-in ceremony, but in all probability have rarely stopped to thoughtfully and thoroughly consider? It is, in a word, faithfulness. Faithfulness to the preservation of our union. Faithfulness to our fellow citizens. Faithfulness to the causes of freedom. And faithfulness to a shared set of values. That faithfulness is demonstrated by the unequivocal loyalty and support of our constitutions and the rule of law above all else and without exception. The fidelity referred to in our oath presumes not just faithfulness to the actual words of our constitutions, but faithfulness to its spirit, that spirit that permeates those constitutions as well. A spirit that's recognized and requited by humility, prudence, and integrity. And this fidelity we pledge to one another is synonymous with the rule of law and is the exact opposite of seeking power for its own sake, which history has revealed time and time again to be a fool's errand. Not long ago, and for a great many years before, Americans and Montanans grew up in an America that was one of the world's most stubbornly civil societies and cultures, where being a neighbor meant more than merely living next door to another family. We shared a positive attitude about life, about neighbors, about families, and about values. Contrast that with the poisonous, coarse, and careless electronic communications of today that can be dispatched at the speed of light with a silent click to every corner of the planet Earth and beyond at least 2.4 billion times a second. That's how much of the country and much of the world talks to each other these days. It's dizzying, it's vacuous, and it's perilous. It's no wonder that such an invitation for today is such an alternative attraction. It seems almost impossible to manage the noise, to me, to control the flood of unverified and frequently inaccurate communications, oftentimes conceived in rage and competition, and then once dispatched, regretted, because all of that hateful piffle is now etched and preserved, apparently forever, in a network of accessible internet files. Don't get me wrong, the internet is a marvelous creation in so many ways, but it will never replace personal conversations. It has also strained and stunted our social existence, especially our political affairs, with false and irresponsible insinuations that have absolutely no basis in fact. Social media has left us in a constant state of shared incomprehension and confusion. We have to bring more self-discipline, integrity, and sensitivity to our communications and our comments individually and collectively to fulfill the requirements of fidelity to one another, fidelity to the cause of freedom, fidelity to the defense of our democracy, and fidelity to the shared belief in the future of our country and our state. It's not really a big ask. It's not a hopeless call to return to simpler times. It's a hopeful call to return to the rule of law, to simple, timeless, and enduring values, to relentless pursuit of the truth, to presuming the best of each other, to listening in good faith before acting or responding, exuding generosity and grace, self-correcting our own mistakes, seeing and hearing through our hearts, excluding ambitions, and setting about to accomplish something, not to be somebody. Sadly, we hear so much about our divisions. We're conditioned to think that we have little in common as a nation and as a people. But there's a credible and an emerging evidence that the majority of the American people, the great middle of America, and I would include all of you in that definition, are tired of the intramural wars, where all sides emphasize only their divisions, with the hope of having them magnified and instantaneously scattered across the landscape, courtesy of the internet, and the propaganda that's incessantly pervaded by political hucksters more interested in their ratings than faithfully serving the best interest of their fellow citizens. In my privileged moments to be at work for the people of Montana, I had occasion to provide commencement addresses. And I attended one in Biddle, Montana, an 8th grade graduation where there was one graduate. And she said to me that evening at her 8th grade graduation, we're not groups, different groups of people in America. We are, she said, one group of different Americans. One group of different Americans. It seems it would serve us well to remember that. Thank you.